A gentle hum filled the air inside a well-lit jewelry store in Portland, Maine. Gleaming cases lined the walls, showcasing rings, necklaces, and gems that shimmered under the soft glow of strategically placed lights. Each piece seemed to hold a story, a whisper of elegance waiting to adorn someone's life. At the entrance, Ellen stepped in, adjusting her worn leather purse on her shoulder. She was in her late 70s, her silver curls tucked neatly beneath a beret. She looked around with a familiar smile, her dark eyes taking in the displays she'd seen countless times before. Ellen's son, Mark, had poured his heart into this store, turning it into one of the most admired spots in town. She felt a surge of pride each time she stepped inside, knowing her son had built this success from the ground up. Today, Ellen had come to surprise Mark. It was a routine of theirs. Every few weeks, she dropped by unannounced, bringing him lunch from his favorite cafe. She had a soft spot for these visits, watching him interact with clients, seeing him in his element. But today, Mark was out. A brief message from the clerk at the front desk explained he'd stepped away for a meeting with a new supplier and would be back shortly. Ellen didn't mind. She could easily spend time browsing the displays, letting her thoughts wander. As she walked down the aisles, her fingers lightly brushed the glass cases, feeling a warmth that only came from years of familiarity. Her eyes drifted to a particular set of diamond earrings. They reminded her of a pair she'd once owned many years ago, long before hardships forced her to sell them. For a moment, a flicker of nostalgia washed over her. Lost in thought, Ellen leaned closer to get a better look at the earrings. Captivated by their sparkle, she moved slightly, her fingers resting against the glass. But then, a small slip, her fingers brushed against the edge of the stand, and one of the earrings tipped over, falling to the floor with a quiet clink. Ellen's heart skipped a beat. She bent down slowly, careful with her movements, feeling a touch of embarrassment for causing a scene, even if no one seemed to notice. As she reached out to pick up the earring, a pair of sharp heels clicked against the floor behind her. Ellen looked up, blinking as a tall, stern-faced saleswoman stood over her. The woman, whom Ellen didn't recognize, must have been new to the store. Her expression was unreadable, yet Ellen sensed a chill in her gaze. There was no warmth, no trace of the familiar friendliness she'd grown accustomed to in this place her son owned. But Ellen brushed it off, trying to explain as she rose to her feet. "I'm so sorry, dear." Ellen began with a gentle smile. "I just wanted a closer look. This earring reminds me of a pair I once." But the woman didn't give her a chance to finish. With a glare that pierced through Ellen, the saleswoman crossed her arms, looking her over with an expression that held more than just disapproval. The saleswoman's voice was sharp and cold, cutting through the air like glass. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded, her eyes narrowing as she stared at Ellen. Taken aback, Ellen straightened herself and held up the earring delicately. "I accidentally knocked it over," she began, her voice steady but soft. "I was just admiring it." "And I." "Admiring it?" the saleswoman interrupted, her tone dripping with disdain. "You mean pocketing it, don't you?" The accusation hung in the air, heavy and stifling. Ellen's breath caught in her throat. "Pocketing it? That's absurd. I've never—" But the woman wasn't listening. Her eyes swept over Ellen, taking in her modest coat and weathered purse. Something cruel flickered in her expression. "People like you don't belong in stores like this," she hissed, her words quiet but venomous, laced with an unspoken prejudice that Ellen felt cut into her like a blade. Ellen's hand trembled as she held out the earring, her voice faltering. "I think there's been some misunderstanding." The saleswoman stepped closer, snatching the earring from Ellen's hand with a force that startled her. "Save your excuses," she snapped. "I'm calling the police." Ellen's heart pounded in her chest. The sheer absurdity of the situation made her head spin. "The police? That's not necessary," she pleaded. "I didn't do anything wrong." Ignoring her protests, the saleswoman pulled out her phone and began dialing. Her voice turned unervingly composed as she spoke to the dispatcher. "Yes, I need officers at Golden Grace Jewelers. We've caught someone trying to steal a diamond earring. She's still here, and I've detained her." "Detained?" Ellen whispered to herself in disbelief. She took a step back, clutching the strap of her purse as if it might ground her in the chaos swirling around her. The next moments unfolded in a blur. Ellen barely registered the sound of the front door swinging open or the quick, heavy steps of two police officers entering the store. Both men were tall, their uniforms crisp and their expressions unreadable. They walked directly toward the saleswoman, who immediately launched into a theatrical recounting of events. "This woman," the saleswoman declared, pointing an accusatory finger at Ellen, "was caught red-handed trying to steal this earring. I had to stop her before she fled." Ellen's hands shook as she tried to speak. "I wasn't trying to steal anything," she said, her voice wavering. "It was an accident. Please, I'm the owner's mother." The officers exchanged a glance, but their attention remained on the saleswoman. One of them turned to Ellen, his gaze hard and impersonal. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step forward." Ellen took a step closer, her knees weak. "Please, this is a mistake," she said, but her voice was barely above a whisper. Before she could say another word, the officer grabbed her arm, pulling her roughly to the side. The sudden force made her stumble, and she winced as they twisted her hands behind her back. "What are you doing?" Ellen cried out, panic flooding her voice. The cold metal of handcuffs clamped around her wrists, and the sound was deafening. Ellen stood frozen, too shocked to move. Tears welled in her eyes as she looked around the store, searching for a friendly face, for anyone who might help. But there was no one, just the saleswoman, watching with a triumphant smirk. "I didn't steal anything," Ellen said, her voice cracking as tears began to spill down her cheeks. "You're making a mistake." One of the officers spoke in a flat, emotionless tone. "You can explain yourself down at the station." The words hit her like a blow, knocking the air out of her lungs. Down at the station? Ellen had lived a long life, faced her share of challenges, but never, not once, had she ever been treated like this. The humiliation was unbearable. She felt like a criminal, though she'd done nothing wrong. The officers began leading her toward the door, their grip firm and unyielding. Ellen's mind raced, each thought more desperate than the last. She didn't understand how this could be happening. This was her son's store, a place that had always felt safe. How had it become a nightmare? As they reached the threshold, a voice boomed from across the room. "What the hell is going on here?" The officers paused, and Ellen turned her head toward the source of the voice. Her heart leapt as she saw Mark standing in the doorway, his expression a mix of confusion and fury. Mark's tailored suit was slightly rumpled, as though he had rushed back to the store. His eyes scanned the scene quickly, taking in his mother's tear-streaked face, the handcuffs, and the saleswoman's smug expression. Without hesitation, he strode forward, his presence commanding the room. "Take those off her," he ordered, his voice low but charged with barely restrained anger. One officer hesitated. "Sir, we're responding to a theft complaint," he began. "Take them off. Now," Mark repeated, each word clipped and precise. His gaze shifted to Ellen. "Are you okay, Mom?" Ellen nodded weakly, her voice trembling. "I didn't do anything, Mark. I just dropped an earring." Mark's jaw tightened. He turned to the saleswoman, his expression icy. "Miss Turner, care to explain why you thought it was appropriate to call the police on my mother?" Miss Turner's confidence faltered. "I didn't know she was your mother," she stammered. "She dropped the earring, and it looked like, well, I thought she was trying to." "You thought?" Mark snapped, his voice rising. "What gave you the right to assume she was a thief?" Miss Turner's face turned pale. "I was just trying to protect the store," she muttered. Mark let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Protect the store from my own mother? Do you have any idea what you've done? You didn't just insult her. You insulted me and everything this business stands for." The officers, sensing the gravity of the situation, quickly removed the handcuffs. Mark was at Ellen's side in an instant, gently rubbing her wrists. "I'm so sorry, Mom," he said softly. "You shouldn't have had to go through that." Ellen's voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't understand how it got this far." Mark straightened, his anger surging again as he addressed the room. "This ends now," he said firmly. His gaze locked onto Miss Turner. "You're fired. I don't need people like you representing my business." Miss Turner opened her mouth to protest, but Mark cut her off. "Get out," he said coldly. The days that followed were a whirlwind of apologies, policy reviews, and efforts to repair the store's reputation. Mark implemented mandatory training programs for all staff, emphasizing respect and fairness. Ellen, though shaken, began to regain her confidence, finding solace in the overwhelming support from the community. Together, they turned the ordeal into an opportunity for growth, ensuring such an injustice would never happen again.